This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris will be making her closing argument remarks in Washington, D.C. NTD national correspondent Jason Blair is on the ground near the site of her address.
Vice President Kamala Harris is scheduled to make her closing argument at the Ellipse behind me a little bit later. Now, this is the same place that former President Trump did his speech on January 6th in 2021. Now, Harris is scheduled to speak at 7:30 p.m. and according to the Parks Service permits, there could be about 20 to 40,000 people showing up here tonight. But however, the D.C. police hinted that they might be expecting even more. Now, from the Ellipse and actually from here as well, you can see the White House in the background. Now, Harris, ahead of her speech, talked to CBS. She said, quote, "I would and do think about that place more in the context of what will be behind me, which is the White House. And I'm doing it here because I think it is very important for the American people to see and think about who will be occupying that space on January 20th. Now, it is called a closing argument, but it definitely is not the end of the Harris campaign trail. Tomorrow, Harris will be in Madison, Wisconsin for a rally with Mumford & Sons and Gracie Adams. Then Thursday, she has 3 stops, 2 in Nevada and 1 in Arizona. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has donated $50 million to Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. The New York Times is reporting Bloomberg donated a large sum to entities supporting Vice President Harris. Harris and her economic team recently held a meeting with Bloomberg. That meeting covered a range of issues, including tax policy. In May, Bloomberg handed out $19 million to the Biden campaign, but did not endorse Harris when she became the presumptive nominee. Tonight, former President Trump is rallying in Allentown, Pennsylvania, a deep blue area of this critical swing state. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more on this. Good evening, Jack. What is Trump's message tonight?
Good evening, Tiffany. Well, Trump is talking very heavily on immigration, illegal immigration, and the economy. Now, this is his 58th straight day on the campaign trail, and in Allentown, Pennsylvania, it's a blue area in the middle of a very purple state. Now, this has 19 electoral college votes, making it the biggest swing state in the country. Now, as far as what Trump said earlier at his Mar-a-Lago this morning, he talked about harsher penalties for and then helping the victims of crimes committed by illegal immigrants. Take a look.
I'm announcing that for the first time under my administration, we will be seizing the assets of the criminal gangs and drug cartels. And we will use those assets to create a compensation fund to provide restitution for the victims of migrant crime, and the government will help in the restoration.
Now, earlier I spoke to Congressman Dan Muser, who told me about legal immigration and the economy being the biggest issues that the former president will attack as in his first weeks in office if reelected. Take a look.
President Trump will secure the border. He will close the border. Only those who are coming across legally will come across. President Trump will stop the fentanyl, stop the human trafficking, just as he did before. Look, Trump as well proved that he knows how to, what the factors are in assuring that we have the most competitive economy in the world. We never had a stronger economy than under the Trump administration, perhaps in the history of the United States of America.
I want to touch on the topic of tariffs and what you think Trump's role on tariffs is that strong tariff on China, especially if that's going to bring back manufacturing to the U.S.?
Well, it definitely will, because we have countries that have 20% tariffs, 25, 30, 35% tariffs against our goods and services, and yet we have minimal tariffs on them. We've had this idea for the last 25 years that it's a great idea for so-called free trade. Basically be a martyr nation, just take it on the chin. All these countries, many of them allies, having these huge tariffs on American-made goods.
Now, if reelected, the former president will have some very famous people in his administration, like RFK Jr. On health, and as well as Elon Musk heading the Office of Government Accountability, and Senator J.D. Vance was on the campaign trail in Michigan, where he spoke highly of Musk being part of the future administration if Trump is reelected. Take a look.
And I think that's why Elon is supporting our candidacy. It's not because he thinks that we're going to do anything for him. It's because he thinks that we're going to make the American nation more peaceful, more prosperous, and more secure. And that's what we're going to do. Now, of course, look, I love the big three automakers in the state of Michigan. I want the big three automakers to thrive and to survive, but they're not going to if we keep on forcing electric vehicles made in China down the throats of American consumers and American workers.
Both Trump and Harris have invested more time, money, and energy in Pennsylvania than any other state, let alone swing state. That's because Pennsylvania chose the last two, they were siding with the last two presidents being elected. Now, as far as polling, both Harris and Trump seem to be very close in the polls, both tied according to Real Clear Politics polling averages at 48%. Very close neck and neck here, and we're all awaiting for Trump's speech tonight here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right, Jack, thanks for those updates. Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon is now a free man. He was released from federal prison early this morning and was met by his daughter.
I've been empowered by my 4 months at Danbury Federal Prison. Why was I empowered? Because I was able to listen, to observe, and to learn from working class minorities. And I'm finally out of being a political prisoner for standing up for my political beliefs against an illegitimate committee in the House that did not have a ranking member and did not have minority counsel.
Bannon also returned to his podcast and online show War Room, saying he was focused on helping Trump win the presidential election. Bannon served his full 120-day sentence for contempt of Congress. He was convicted in 2022 for defying a subpoena by the now defunct House January 6th committee. His appeal of the conviction is ongoing, even as he concluded his prison sentence. If Trump wins the election, Europe will likely feel the impact too. One analyst says it could push U.S. allies to find a quick solution to the war in Ukraine. Trump has said he could end the conflict in a very short time. NTD's international correspondent David Vives spoke with a French journalist and expert on U.S. politics about how a Trump win could impact Ukraine.
A potential re-election of former President Trump to the White House might lead European Union leaders to reconsider their options in the Ukraine war. It could amplify conservative voices in Europe calling for a reassessment of support for Ukraine. The U.S. has provided more than $64 billion in aid to Kiev, including advanced weapons needed to counter Russian forces. The EU and its member states have also contributed military aid worth $47 billion. In April, Trump advocated for Ukraine assistance to be made a loan rather than a grant. Journalist and author Gérald Olivier says there might be behind-the-scenes support for Trump to find a quick resolution to the conflict.
I'm convinced that this conflict will end within 1 year of Donald Trump becoming president. That may involve a form of change in the current borders of Ukraine.
Trump has also questioned U.S. commitment to NATO several times, citing a lack of financial contributions from EU countries. Olivier suggests that a Trump presidency would bring changes to NATO.
It may involve a slight alteration to the kind of relationship that NATO members have with the U.S. Remember what he said when he was president the first time. If you don't pay, we won't protect you. And some have been paying, but still not up to what they're supposed to do.
The EU Commission has pushed for an independent European defense strategy for months. However, Olivier believes it is almost certain that the EU bloc will align its defense and security stance with the US, whoever wins.
The fact is, if you ask the Polish today, who do you trust to protect you in case of Russian aggression? And 9 out of 10 will tell you the US, not the Europeans. And that's the main problem. Europe, if it were to build its own defense, would have to agree for someone to become ahead and above the rest, and they don't want that. The Germans will never accept a European defense under French leadership. The French will never accept a European defense under German leadership.
According to NATO, U.S. defense spending accounts for about 2/3 of the alliance's total defense budget. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
North Korea's foreign minister is traveling to Moscow today. This comes as Russia is conducting nuclear drills, which include long-range missiles. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest, starting with an update on the battlefield situation.
At least 4 people are dead after a Russian attack on the city of Kharkiv. That's according to local authorities, who say at least 7 more are injured. 2 houses are completely destroyed and about 20 have suffered damage. A building which was being considered for inclusion on UNESCO's World Heritage List was damaged too. Now, this alleged attack comes as Russia continues working with Pyongyang. North Korea's foreign minister is on her way to Moscow on Tuesday. She's seeking strategic dialogue to strengthen ties with Russia. And this comes as the US says North Korean troops are getting closer to Ukraine. The North Korean foreign minister is visiting Russia for the 2nd time in just 6 weeks. The Pentagon now confirms for the first time that North Korean troops are in Russia's Kursk region already and what they might do there.
Initial indications are that these troops will be employed in some type of infantry role.
And as Russia is strengthening ties with the north, Kyiv is doing the same with Seoul. The presidents of Ukraine and South Korea say they had a phone call on Tuesday. They agreed to develop a strategy to respond to North Korea's involvement in the conflict. And also in Russia on Tuesday.
We will practice the actions of officials in managing the use of nuclear weapons.
President Vladimir Putin says Russia test-fired missiles over distances of thousands of miles. That's to simulate a massive nuclear response to an enemy-first strike. When asked about the drills, the Pentagon suggested there's no need to be concerned.
This is a regularly scheduled exercise, so no surprise there. We've not seen anything in terms of Russian strategic forces and its posture that would compel us to change our posture.
Putin says the use of nuclear weapons would be Russia's last resort in a real-life scenario, and that he doesn't want to enter a new arms race. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Israel has cut all ties with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency and will no longer allow it to operate in the country. Israel has accused it of employing Hamas terrorists and said that some of them participated in the October 7th attacks. NTD's Jason Perry has the story and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
On Monday, members of the Israeli parliament voted on a bill that would ban the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, from operating in the country. And in a majority vote, lawmakers banned UNRWA from operating in Israel and cut off all ties with the United Nations agency. A co-author of that bill shared her thoughts on it.
What we've seen in Gaza is how Hamas has taken over United Nations facility, schools, hospital clinics, and headquarters in order to use them as military bases to hide ammunition, to hide rockets, to actually commit terror activities from the United Nations facilities.
Israeli lawmakers accuse some UNRWA staff members of participating in the October 7th massacre. However, an UNRWA spokesperson said this on Tuesday.
There is no concrete evidence provided to us linking individuals to the events of October 7th so that we could take action.
Israel previously reported that over 100 UNRWA employees were Hamas terrorists. And they've shown videos of alleged UNRWA workers participating in the October 7th attacks, including this man wearing black who helped carry a dead body into an SUV on October 7th. And another alleged UNRWA employee who was also a Hamas commander and ordered the attack on young people hiding in this bomb shelter on October 7th. NTD reached out to UNRWA regarding this individual. In an email from UNRWA's Director of Communications, Juliet Tauma, she confirmed that the individual was employed by UNRWA and had been flagged by the Israeli government. UNRWA said they then asked for more information about the individual so they could take action, but never heard back from Israel. Israel's ambassador to the UN also mentioned that the U.S. Congress had already voted to stop funding UNRWA before Israel's decision to ban the agency. And he said there are dozens of non-governmental organizations that currently operate in the Gaza Strip, and that Israel will continue to work with them. But UNRWA spokesperson John Fowler said that all other UN agencies depend completely on UNRWA's logistical platforms and thousands of staff to be able to do their work. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos is defending his decision to not allow the paper to endorse either presidential candidate. This as the paper reportedly loses hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Other outlets are now also withholding endorsements. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the report.
Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos is defending his decision to not allow the Washington Post to endorse either presidential candidate, saying that his decision was a principled one and one to try to undo the phenomenon of Americans not trusting media outlets. Bezos said, quote, "What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one." He also tried to paint a picture of transparency in that op-ed by addressing a meeting that's been under the microscope. This was a meeting between a CEO of Bezos' other company, Blue Origin. That CEO met with Donald Trump on the day that the Washington Post made the decision to not give any endorsements. Now, Bezos said that that meeting had nothing to do with the decision, but when you look at the internal friction, staffers with the Washington Post might believe otherwise.
And this is obviously an effort by Jeff Bezos to curry favor with Donald Trump in the anticipation of his possible victory. This argument that they're making that somehow they want to become above it all on this thing, they've endorsed all kinds of candidates in this election season. They endorsed the Democratic nominee in Maryland. They've endorsed other Democratic nominees. So is it just only in the race that Donald Trump happens to be running in that they've decided not to endorse it?
And it's not just the Washington Post and the LA Times that have decided not to endorse either presidential candidate, but now USA Today has become the latest network, leading their 200 outlets locally not to endorse any candidate in any national race. And then when you look at the historical context of this, back in the 1970s, Republicans were the favored party among media outlets. 2008, Democrats became the favored party among media outlets. But then you look at 2020, and although Democrats are still the favored party, a large number, 44, are choosing not to endorse at all. And now you see that trend continuing and expanding today, with big outlets like the Washington Post choosing to withhold from endorsements altogether. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Yet another major newspaper decides not to endorse anyone for president. USA Today will not throw its weight behind a candidate in this year's election. A spokesperson says the paper will focus on providing facts. It wants readers to make up their own minds. The decision also applies to several hundred other publications under the USA Today network. In 2020, the publication backed President Joe Biden. In 2016, it urged readers not to vote for then presidential candidate Trump, but stopped short of endorsing rival Hillary Clinton. It cited serious reservations about Clinton's suitability for the role. But should a news outlet have a stake in the White House race? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall to hear from the people.
Who has your vote in this election?
Donald Trump. Kamala Harris was vice president already for 1,400 days. All her new plans and everything, why didn't you do it for the past 4 years?
I voted for Kamala Harris, and I did an absentee ballot to Nevada. Preserving our democracy is front and center in this election.
Donald Trump, baby. Any man that can take a bullet for my country has my support.
I would say I'm more of like an independent, and I'm trying to figure out which candidate to vote for right now.
Well, I've already voted for Harris. She's the candidate that best fits my views. She cares about women's issues, abortion.
I voted for Trump. I know for the 4 years that Trump was president that things were going pretty well, and I kind of want to keep seeing that.
Well, the Washington Post has recently decided to not endorse a candidate in this election. So do you think a newspaper should ever endorse a presidential candidate?
No, a reporter's job is to report unbiased news, the facts as they are. If a newspaper just goes outright and usually endorses someone, then you know what to expect from them.
As an editorial board, I think they absolutely have that ability and probably should. I mean, that's the point of an editorial board. They make opinion pieces every day.
I do not think a newspaper should endorse a candidate because it would be more biased towards one party than the other.
Normally, I wouldn't say news media needs to endorse a candidate, but when the stakes are this high and it's less about difference in opinion and difference in policy.
I think the goal of the media is to share the facts of the situation, allow candidates to run their own affiliated parties.
I mean, they're a private enterprise. I'm not against it, but I find it funny that they can endorse somebody they like, but if they don't like it, then they refuse to endorse anybody.
What if a newspaper endorsed the candidate that you like? In that case, would you still be standing your ground on that?
I think so. I would still stand my ground on my original decision.
I would agree with endorsement, but yeah, I would have the same opinion. You know, what I hold is what I hold.
It's more important than trying to not appear biased, as Jeff Bezos said, so I think it's incredibly important that people endorse a candidate that will preserve our rights and our democracy.
If they endorse the candidate that I elect, I wouldn't be one way or the other about it. It would not sway my vote either way.
Joining us now at the Election Data Hub is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, with 16 electoral votes at stake, the state of Georgia is behind only Pennsylvania in terms of most important battleground states. What are you seeing in terms of polls there?
Yeah, this has been close for quite some time now. Let's take a look at a recent poll here. Now, this is according to a Marist College poll of likely voters taken just last week. As you can see, we've got a dead heat tie here between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Now, if you rewind 4 years to the 2020 election, Joe Biden narrowly took this state over Donald Trump, just 0.3 of a point there. That's approximately 12,000 votes. And according to this recent poll here, not much has changed. Now, when you talk about demographics in Georgia, you can't ignore black voters. They make up approximately 1/3 of all eligible voters in the state. So let's go ahead and take a look at that demographic here. Georgia black voters here. In 2020, Joe Biden, when he won the state, 88% of the black voters compared to Trump's 11%, a 77-point lead here for Joe Biden. 4 years later, according to the polls, Kamala Harris is 82% of the black voters, Trump at 15%, a 67-point lead for Kamala Harris. But that is still a 10-point swing in favor of Donald Trump. That equates to approximately 150,000 votes here. Now, if we take a look at the white voters in the state here as well, here, Georgia white voters in 2020, Trump 69% of white voters compared to Joe Biden's 30%, so a 39-point advantage there for Donald Trump. 4 years later, according to the polls here, Trump's 67 to Kamala's 32. It's a 35-point lead. So that's actually a 4-point swing, though, in favor of Kamala Harris. That 4 points coming her way is approximately 100,000 votes to Kamala Harris. Let's take a look at one more demographic here. Let's take a look at the college-educated voters here. This is Georgia voters with a college degree here. Now, these numbers here are the margins of the Democratic nominee versus Donald Trump. In 2016, Hillary Clinton had a 1-point lead in this demographic over Trump. Now, Trump actually won this state in 2016 by more than 200,000 votes. But look at this, a huge advantage then for Biden. 15 points over Donald Trump in 2020 among those with a college degree on his way to a victory. And as you can see here, Kamala Harris has increased that lead to 17 points now in the poll. Let's take a look at the opposite here, though. Georgia voters without a college degree here. And again, these numbers on the margins of Trump versus the Democratic nominee. 2016, he had an 11-point lead over Hillary Clinton on his way to winning the state. That was down slightly to 9 when he lost in 2020. And as you can see here, not much change to 10 in 2024. Small differences, but just a 1% either way equals 30,000 votes. So very critical here. So like you said, 16 electoral votes here in the state of Georgia. Any slight change can really swing this race for either candidate. Back to you at the desk.
All right, Dave, as always, thanks for that breakdown. And the races that will determine the balance of power in the Senate are also tightening. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joins us from the D.C. Data Hub with the latest on the critical Senate races.
That's right, we're 1 week away from the general election, and it will be a handful of races that will determine the balance of power in the Senate. Now, let's look at how the balance of power in the Senate stands as of the latest polls of today, Tuesday. We can see here that for this general elections, there's 34 seats that are up for re-election in the Senate out of the 100 seats. Of those 34, 23 are currently held by Democrats or independents that caucus with Democrats, and 11 of them are held by Republicans. That means that Democrats need to defend twice as many seats as Republicans. And we can see here those 34 races, and we can see that the critical ones are going to be these ones. The toss-ups, the ones that are in gray, the toss-ups are within the margin of error, 5 points in difference in between the Republican and Democratic candidate. But there's a slight advantage that Republicans already have going into this general election, and that is the Senate seat of West Virginia. Let's look here at West Virginia. We know that Senator Joe Manchin, the independent that is the current senator of West Virginia, is stepping down, and we can see that former Republican governor Jim Justice is leading in the polls in the state of West Virginia for that critical seat that will, from the polls that we're seeing right now, will certainly flip red. So that would add to the tally of Republicans. But now let's look at the map of the critical races, those that will define the balance of power in the Senate. We have the most important ones, the toss-up races, are right here in the Rust Belt. We're talking about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are toss-up. They're within the margin of error. And then we can see here the lean red states. Those are Nebraska, Montana up here, and Texas with Ted Cruz that are leading in the polls by a lean and moderate margin. And then we have, of course, Nevada and Arizona, the lean Democrats. Now let's jump in a little bit more into these lean races and the toss-up races to better understand the Senate balance of power. Let's jump into those races that are leaning right. As we can see here, we have the first is the Senate race of Montana. We have Jon Tester. Jon Tester is the incumbent in the state of Montana. He's looking for a third re-election, but he has never been in the ballot with former President Donald Trump. And we can see that the former Navy SEAL Team Sheehy is actually leading by 6 points, giving a significant advantage to Republicans in the Senate race of Montana. In Nebraska, a similar story. We have incumbent Senator Fisher leading by just 2 points, but again, these are the lean right Senate races. And lastly, we have Ted Cruz leading in the Senate race of Texas over Congressman Colin Allred by 5 points. Now, let's look at the Senate races that are leaning Democrat, those that are likely as of today to be picked up by Democrats. The most important one we can see here is the state of Nevada. We see that the incumbent Senator Jackie Rosen is leading over Sam Brown, a former Afghanistan war veteran that Republicans have already tried in the ballot box in 2022. He did not make the cut, trying again now in 2024, but still falling short behind incumbent Senator Jackie Rosen. And if we look at Arizona, we also see a similar situation as Nevada. We got a Republican candidate repeating, this time Carrie Lake not running for governor as she did in 2022, but for the Senate seat of Arizona. But Congressman Ruben Gallego, he's leading in the polls by a significant amount, by 6 points. So it's a little more sure that Arizona, as of now, going blue. And lastly, we need to go and look at the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt, just like in the presidential race, will be critical. Those are the toss-up races for the Senate, as also the battleground states for the presidential race. If we look here at Wisconsin, we have Democrats, Tammy Baldwin, incumbent, leading. If we look at Michigan, Elisa Slotkin, current Congresswoman, trying to step into the Senate seat that Debbie Stabenow, a 24-year-old senator, is leaving open, leading Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate who's also a former congressman. And we go Bob Casey, Pennsylvania, by a very small margin, 2 points ahead of Dave McCormick, but still very important Senate seat. Bob Casey's trying to get reelected. He's also the son of a former governor, so name recognition is probably pushing him ahead of Dave McCormick in this very important and close race. And then finally, if we go to Ohio, we got Sherrod Brown besting, as of now in the polls, of Bernie Moreno, who was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. So if we go back here to the balance of power, we need to remember that Republicans need to only flip 3 seats. Of those 3 seats, we already know that West Virginia is most certainly going to flip from blue to red. So there's only 2 other seats that Republicans will need to conquer the Senate. And we can see there will be here those in the toss-up races. These 2, we'll see where Republicans might want to edge out Democrats to the final tally after November 5th. Back to you.
Back, I'm Tiffany Meyer. Election Day is now just a week away, and more than 50 million people have already voted early in person or via mail-in ballots. NTD's Daniel Monahan breaks down the latest voting news.
The trend of registered Republican voters going to the polls earlier and returning more mail-in ballots appears to be continuing. This has eaten into Democrats' early voting totals. For overall early voting, registered Democratic voters make up almost 40%. Republican voters stand at about 36% in states that report party affiliation. And for early in-person voting, Republicans have a 600,000 vote advantage over Democrats, but Democrats have a nearly 5 million vote advantage for mail-in ballot returns so far. Early voting data indicates that mail-in voting won't be as prominent as it was in 2020. Many states that year discouraged in-person Election Day voting because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Former President Trump previously encouraged his supporters to cast only in-person ballots on Election Day, but he has largely reversed course in recent months. Meanwhile, the Nevada Supreme Court weighed in on an election case. It ruled that mail-in ballots without postmarks can be counted if they arrive by 5 p.m. 3 days after Election Day. The court rejected a bid by Republicans, former President Trump's campaign, and a voter to block them from being counted. 5 justices acknowledged that state law covering vote counting was not clear about ballots that have an unclear postmark or processing date, but they said that the apparent original intent of state lawmakers was to expand the freedom of Nevadans to vote. The Harris and Trump presidential campaigns have each visited the key state of Pennsylvania more than any other swing state in recent weeks. From Labor Day on September 2nd through last weekend, the campaigns have made a combined 43 visits to Pennsylvania. That's more than all of their visits to Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia combined. Pennsylvania has the highest number of electoral votes among battleground states, with 19. The latest Real Clear polling averages show Trump with slight leads in all battleground states. The largest lead is in Georgia, where Trump is up 2.3%. The smallest is in Michigan, where the former president is just barely up at 0.1%. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss the latest early voting numbers and voter sentiments in key swing states is Nathan Worcester, national political reporter at the Epoch Times. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you. Now, you've been to all the swing states that have early voting. From your conversations with the people on the ground, what is motivating them to come out and vote early?
Thanks for having me again. I think that the motivations I've heard range from everyday things like, I'm going to be busy on Election Day, I want to get this out of the way, to real statements of passion and commitment regarding their candidates. You hear a lot of people in the Harris camp who are very horrified at the idea of Trump being reelected. On the other hand, just today in Wisconsin, I spoke to a number of Trump voters who all told me that they believe their candidate is the one who is necessary to save the country, to put the country back on a good course, and they believe that Harris would be a continuation of an administration that they feel has failed the country. So there's a great deal of passion, but in some cases, people are simply doing what is a convenient option for them.
And speaking of Wisconsin, you have a recent piece noting that in Wisconsin, early in-person voting is up 40% from 2020. What is behind that substantial increase?
Well, I think it's interesting to dig deeper into the data. I like to examine Dane County, home of Madison and the University of Wisconsin, a very blue area, alongside Waukesha County, which is a collar county of Milwaukee, probably the largest consistently red county in the state. And so you see a higher mail request rate from Dane County, but in relative terms, you actually see an overall higher absentee request rate from Waukesha when you compare the populations directly. And then when you actually look at that early voting, which in Wisconsin is in-person absentee voting at the clerk's office or a similar location, you have more of that now in Waukesha than in Dane County, despite the fact that one population is larger than the other. I think that Trump's message of vote early, vote by mail, vote any way that you can is resonating with people. You see this across the country. I saw it for myself in Waukesha and in Jefferson County, another fairly red county outside of Milwaukee. Of course, there's still significant voting, early voting and mail voting from unaffiliated and Democrat voters. I should also note that in Wisconsin, registration is not actually tracked, so you're just going by what people tell you and looking at things like which counties appear to be stronger than the other and how does that correlate with past voting.
And Nathan, you also have a piece out about early voting in Michigan, which has been in the headlines due to the Arab American and Muslim communities there and the over 100,000 uncommitted votes in the Democratic primary earlier this year. Now, you highlighted the long lines for early voting and how some were deterred by that. Tell us about the reasons for those who stayed and those who didn't.
Now, those I spoke to who didn't stay often would simply say that they could vote absentee. I think that one common factor from many people who had issues was the fact that they had physical problems. They, in some cases, were older. I spoke to one woman right after voting who had to sit down on a park bench and recover. She had been in a 2-hour line. And there were similar lines that I noticed in Nevada and in other states. One interesting thing that I took away from Michigan was from my conversations at the Trump makeshift office in Hamtramck. This is a heavily Muslim community in the Detroit area where there has been outreach, I believe, really championed by the Oakland County GOP to try to reach voters who in many cases are disaffected Democrats, not expecting to support Harris as a continuation of Biden. One woman that I spoke with said that she had had the experience of knocking on doors where the information they have indicates that the people lean liberal or would generally be Democrats. And she'll speak to people who make it very clear that they're pro-Trump or at the very least not pro-Harris. So that's anecdotal, but it's coming from somebody who's tracking this sort of information. It also comes after the mayor of that community endorsed Trump. And recently in Michigan, you had a group of imams and other leaders from those communities come up on stage and say that at least for them, Trump is the candidate of peace. That is the pitch that they're making. In the context of the Israel-Palestine war, they're not able to make a very pro-Palestine pitch, but the pitch as peacemaker has some legs with Arab and Muslim Michiganders.
And now the 51 million early votes cast this year are about a third of the total 2020 vote count when more than 158 million Americans voted. That's according to the Federal Election Commission. Now, reports are noting that this year Republicans are closing the gap with Democrats in early voting totals. In your view, what could this mean for this year's election results?
I think it's a strong suggestion, alongside things like the polling market. Predictive outcomes right now, I believe they have roughly a 2/3 likelihood. That's what the people betting on this would expect from the election of Trump winning, as opposed to about a third who Harris. You've also got to look at this alongside the fact that in key states, including, as you mentioned, Pennsylvania and then also Wisconsin, those mail ballots are not going to be processed until Election Day. And some of the processing is not going to begin in 2 other key states, North Carolina and Georgia. So I think we should expect there to be a closure of this gap, at least to some extent. But alongside some other very important factors, I think just looking at what Americans care about, the economy, the general sense that many Americans have that the economy is not good, despite what many numbers say. And I would say just the strangeness of this election overall. It's been strange on the Republican side, but on the other side, you've had this fairly late replacement of the candidate with his vice president. All of that does seem to suggest that it's looking likelier and likelier to be a Trump victory. Then again, though, as I said, you still have those mail ballots that could really tip things on and even after Election Day.
Nathan Worcester, national political reporter at the Epoch Times. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Retribution begins for Chase Bank customers who allegedly stole money from ATMs using what came to be known as the infinite money glitch. The bank is now suing them. Here's the story.
JPMorgan Chase has begun suing customers who allegedly stole money from its ATMs using an apparent software glitch.
People were writing fraudulent checks and basically writing a check, input it into their Chase Bank account, and then they're withdrawing that money from an ATM.
Financial expert Joe Schmitz says it even became a viral TikTok trend, sometimes called the infinite money glitch. This video, viewed over 100,000 times,
it's a glitch right now. They giving everybody money.
Shows a young woman telling her mother about the glitch.
No, thank you. I paid. Thank you for trying, though. I paid. You lame.
The bank is investigating thousands of incidents but has not yet been repaid. A notable case involves over $290,000, allegedly stolen by a Houston man. Other amounts range from $80,000 to $141,000. The bank has not disclosed the total amount that was stolen in the viral scam.
If you make a deposit, usually there's a hold, put on the deposit by the bank for a period of time until they can verify and clear it. But in this case, there was a glitch.
Financial expert Lawrence Sprung says usually only a small amount of a check can be withdrawn during the hold period. But because of the glitch, people were able to withdraw all of it. JPMorgan Chase wants not only the return of the stolen money, but also interest, overdraft fees, lawyers' fees, and punitive damages.
Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn, New York has been a boxing powerhouse since 1937. It has trained 137 world champions, including legends like Jake LaMotta and Muhammad Ali. NTD's Daniel Monahan spoke with the gym's owner, Bruce Silverglade, about the gym's legacy and its ongoing community impact.
Bruce Silverglade is the sole owner and driving force behind Gleason's Gym. He has owned it for the past 40-plus years. The gym owner says boxing has many benefits.
The sport will teach you how to overcome fear, total focus, total concentration. It'll get you slimmed down. It'll get your blood pressure taken care of, diabetes taken care of. So you get in a great physical condition, and once you get in a physical condition, you get in a better mental condition.
Silverglade says boxing is unique compared to other sports.
Boxing is the only sport where you have somebody standing 2 feet in front of you trying to give you a concussion and throwing punches at you. So it certainly builds character, and you certainly will be fearful. That's a natural thing. It's a natural safety device that your body has, and we're going to teach you how to learn that and put it to your best use to protect yourself. And when you can do it in a boxing ring, you can do it anywhere in the rest of your life.
Gleason's Gym currently has 6 female world champions. On the men's side, Khalid Twaiti just won a WBA continental title, and Elton Derry from Guyana will also soon compete for a world title. Apart from training future greats, Gleason's Gym is also giving back to the community.
We have a lot of programs. We have some volunteer and some charity programs for kids that need the discipline and referred to us through the schools or a parole officer or a mother, and they need discipline. And so we bring them into the sport and try to show them what it's all about.
Silverglade says there's a common misconception that boxing is more dangerous than other sports.
Boxing, actually, out of any major sports, is the 17th least sport to get injured at. There's going to be more injuries in football, baseball, basketball, soccer than there is in the sport of boxing.
The gym owner says boxing can help you stay safe in everyday life.
What we're going to do is get you in such great condition that you can outrun the person. Don't fight them, okay? Because it's not going to be a fair fight on the street. They're going to have a knife, they're going to have a gun. Avoid it. Try not to get into a confrontation.
Gleason's Gym, according to Silverglade, is a community center and a melting pot in one.
They're dressed in their workout clothes. You don't know who's the doctor, who's the guy from Wall Street that makes more money than God, who's the kid from the projects that doesn't have any money at all, who's the school teacher, who just invented something, who just wrote a book. They're all out there training together.
People pay a monthly membership at Gleason's. Some have been coming back for 30 to 40 years, which for Silverglade is the best feedback of all. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.